Celtics Talk Podcast is presented by 24autogroup.com. 11 locations across New England.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Celtics Talk Podcast, coming to you directly after Brad Stevens meeting with reporters in his end of the season media session, a 24-minute chat with reporters, and then we get to talk to him for NBC Sports Boston a little bit afterwards. You'll see that video coming up at the end of the pod, but we'll start here. Like Brad pretty much laying it out. Joe Mazzulla is going to be back, talking like someone that doesn't plan to make rather large changes to the core of this team. Now, of course, he left the door open for potential to go in different directions, but Brad essentially saying multiple times that this core has been so successful and that he trusts it and believes that he can't overreact in the moment to the fact that the Celtics lost a disappointing Game 7 and complicated their path throughout the playoffs. I thought that was one of the more telling things that Brad went back to. And, you know, when we're sitting here hunting for answers of how the Celtics are not playing in Game 1 of the NBA Finals tonight, a lot of it reverts back to just kind of not being consistent enough. And so Brad, rather than wanting to reshape this whole thing and knowing that they were in the finals last year, they could have very easily been back in the finals this year, that it might just be more small tweaks. And so I've got a lot of pushback from people when I said that the roadmap this offseason should be simple. It's Supermax Jalen. It's add some support to Joe Mazzulla's staff, and it's tinkering on the edges. And I know that's not sexy. That's not fun. It's a lot more exciting to talk about potential trades that you could make and superstars you could go get. Just remind everybody that the Celtics had a chance to at least talk with the Nets about Kevin Durant for Jaylen Brown last summer or into this season and elected to ride it out. I don't think that there's anyone out there that makes you think too hard. Now, I know some people have said, well, what if you got multiple pieces, and what if you got younger, or what if you added more defense, or what if you added right pieces that might accentuate Tatum's talent? I get it. You know, but the thing I go back to is it's a talent-driven league in the NBA, and you need two top 20-ish players to really have a chance at being an elite team, unless you're the Miami Heat and you have that culture and you have like really good players and really good role players and know who you are. The Celtics know who they are. They didn't always play like it this year, but I think a lot of it next season will be getting back to that defensive identity, leading further into the core of this team, crossing your fingers on health, having maybe Robert Williams come into the year as healthy as he's ever been. And then just kind of riding it forward with, okay, Jason and Jalen, this is the core. We know the new CBA is coming, but we're going to figure that out along the way and trying to hope that that's enough to get back. Now, there are no guarantees, and certainly this team has to be proactive, as we've talked long about, and you'll hear a lot coming up in the coming episodes of the Celtics Talk Pod. We're going to talk a lot about the CBA and like the prohibitive changes that are going to make it tough on teams like the Celtics to keep spending and put good players around their core. It's going to make it so you're not as loaded with talent as you were this year. And even though they didn't fully maximize it, it's going to complicate the path necessarily to staying elite and staying in that mix. But Brad Stevens saying at that press conference today, he's got Mike Zarin, Austin Ainge. They're sitting there pouring through that CBA documents, or what they have of them so far, 99.9% of it, and hoping to make sure that they know this thing inside and out so that they can try to sustain the talent. Now, as I've told you guys, I do think there's tough decisions coming. So if you're going to supermax Jalen, and again, remember that will happen this summer, and he'll accept that $290-something million extension, but he's still got 1 year left on his current deal. So that money doesn't kick in till essentially 2 years from now. And then that's the same summer that Jason Tatum is going to sign as Supermax, but his deal won't kick in till the summer after that. So you do have about a 2-3 year rampway here before things get really crazy prohibitive. That's still going to mean with this new CBA, you got to get below what's called the second apron. And the Celtics would be above that right now. And that would they'd handcuff them in terms of moves they could make, most notably like not having the mid-level exception available, not being able to trade for a player that makes more than an outgoing player. A lot of 1-for-1 trades would have to happen. It's essentially, the bottom line is the Celtics are going to have to start working towards getting below that second line. And yet you'll have some wiggle room. Remember, Al Horford's money is getting slashed this offseason because this was the final year of that extension he signed with Philly. and now he'll go to the extension he just inked with Boston, which is only $10 million a season. You've got Rob on reasonable money. We'll see what happens with Grant Williams. There'll be a lot of conversation around that. But I do think the one point where they might have to start thinking is, can you afford to pay 3 guards, Malcolm Brogdon, Marcus Smart, and Derek White, $18+ million a piece, up to I think $22 million with Brogdon, and still find a way to stay under that line? I think there's a chance there where, as good as Brogdon was as a regular season player, and as much of a luxury as it was to have him as your 6th man, you might have to start thinking how to get off that money, help dip below, maybe give you some resources to re-sign a Grant Williams, maybe give you some resources to examine other places to spend on this roster. And maybe a trade helps fill an area of need, whereas Celtics are very guard heavy this year, and it was difficult to always find time. I mean, Derek White wasn't even on the floor in some key fourth quarter situations. And that's because like Malcolm Brogdon's there, and Joe naturally wanted to use him as well. And so it got complicated, and it had a trickle down effect. Grant Williams practically out of the rotation by March. And so I do think the Celtics have to kind of look at their team, say, who are these 7-8 guys that are definitively going to play in a postseason series? How can we give you a few more on the perimeter, on the periphery of that roster? Guys, maybe that's Sam Hauser, maybe that's Peyton Pritchard, maybe that's Mike Muscala, guys that can help you weather the regular season grind, be available if needed in the postseason, maybe make leaps during that year that make them more serviceable in those moments, but don't cost the upwards of, the $20 million you're paying what amounts to your 3rd guard. So I think those will be the small tweaks the team needs. It certainly needs another center. Look, we're going to spend the whole offseason digesting exactly what this team needs and where it goes and how it fixes and how it ensures more consistency this year. Before we get into all of that, if you want to hear Brad's press conference, it's up on our YouTube page. Again, 24 minutes with reporters as a group. But I want to get you now to our one-on-one with Brad, in which we kind of expanded on a couple topics and dove deeper into a few of them. Here's my chat with Brad Stevens. Brad, you have a very emotional fan base. They want to break up your core. They want to change head coaches. How do you, in the immediate aftermath of a disappointing finish, kind of remain level-headed with how you look moving forward?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, we're all emotional, right? As we go through the roller coasters and the ups and downs of games and series, and then can kind of take a step back after this and reassess it more in the whole. And I think that's my job, right? Is to look at it more from the big picture of, okay, foundationally, where are we? Do we, think that being where we are with small tweaks, we can get to where we want to go? And I really believe in our foundation. It's really hard to be in the mix in this league. The competition's great. Sometimes things have to go your way, and sometimes they do. But you've got to do everything you can to take the luck out. And listen, we didn't have a great playoff run as in whole. And we certainly, were outplayed for the better part of that Miami series, even though it went 7 games. So we have a lot of work to do. And but it doesn't mean that we need to make mistake activity for achievement from my seat. I think we have to understand what's really good and how hard it is to have a foundation and to then figure out how to build off of it.
You've mentioned small tweaks. You don't have to get into names, but when you look at your roster, are there areas, are there positions, when you're watching the totality of the season that you say, I'd really like to upgrade here or do something there?
Well, I think you always have to look for people that fit well with your best players, that accentuate your best players, and then put that team and that group together. As I said in the press conference, not having Rob for the better half of the season, I actually thought our depth bigs did a great job all year and give us a chance to have a great seed and be a top seed in the East and fill those minutes and fill those times. But I thought that we had a lot of guys that were on the perimeter and a lot of guys that could help us on the perimeter. And we just have to look at everything and figure out, okay, how does it all fit together Is it as good of a fit as it can be? Obviously, we can't always predict health, but we have to make ourselves as fortified as possible, both on the perimeter and on the interior.
And you mentioned upstairs about guys coming out of the finals as, probably as dinged up as you had been also.
Is what it is.
Yeah. Right. And not to make excuses, but like, how much do you expect will guys need to get stuff taken care of this summer? Would you like to see? I mean, Jason, that wrist has been bothering him for what feels like 2 years now.
We have a couple of guys that, we'll see what the imaging looks like. There's most of those guys will do imaging on whatever sore or hurt, in the next couple of days. And occasionally something pops up that, you're going to have to address. But I don't have any information like that right now, and we'll see. I think for the most part, we were pretty healthy in the playoffs, and so no excuses there. If you play 20 games in 6 weeks, you're going to be a little banged up, and so, our task was to try to figure out and build as deep of a team that could handle that as possible, but that wasn't why we didn't get it done. We were pretty healthy and pretty available.
In what ways did you see Joe grow from what you knew before he took over as head coach to just the learning experience of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is how's somebody going to be able to organize a group, lead the group, manage the ups and downs, and, a big part of that is, do you walk in and accept responsibility when things don't go well? And I thought all of that was good. The 57 wins in the regular season's a real accomplishment, no matter how good you think you are going into a year, because you're really managing the year and managing the minutes of a lot of guys and playing different lineups and combinations and those type of things. And all you want to do is set yourself up for the chance to have home court advantage and play deep into the playoffs to put your best foot forward. And again, I think if anything that didn't go well in the playoffs, Joe will be the first to look back and say, okay, how do I improve of that? How do we get better off that? And, I have no doubt that we will, and he will.
Your first year, you had Ron Adams as one of your assistants. How beneficial is that? I know you said upstairs that Joe has been through it now 3 years, and but a lot of people on the outside will say, if he had another sounding board or anything is that overrated?
Yeah, it's interesting because he's got a lot of sounding boards all around the world, right? So people that he maybe reaches out to or he consults himself. There's all kinds of sounding boards. I do think the biggest part of a staff is having a group of people that works well together, that can throw great ideas against the wall and then agree on the path ahead and move forward with what the decision is that's made. I did think that obviously when we had our coaching situation in September, as I said earlier, we tried and looked at a couple of people to get somebody to move at the start of a school year who likely has a family, whatever, or in the middle of a year is a little bit more challenging, right? And then the reality is there's not a lot of people available at those times. But we will try to make sure that we add one person to our bench with significant NBA experience, and then go from there. And who knows? Maybe we end up more because of the way the staff shakes itself out. But we have a good staff. They're good coaches, and they work really hard. And they all get back on one page, which I think is really important. When you ask me about Ron, I always joke with Ron. All he did was tell me no for a whole year. And then he begged me to go work for the Warriors because we had won 25 games. So, anyways, I love Ron. Ron's one of my favorites. And no, but he was great. He was a great resource, a great sounding board for me. And but there's nothing like learning through the experience. And obviously, there were a lot of ups, but there's some downs that are going to sting pretty good.
Did Joe ever drag you into a jiu-jitsu dojo or anything like that?
No.
No? You didn't get to fight?
No.
Did you ever want to fight him?
No.
Okay.
No. I pick my battles.
That's understandable. So I know you said upstairs that you've got Zarin and Austin Ains reading through the CBA.
Which we don't have yet. So they're reading through nothing now.
But we're all overreacting to what we do know.
Correct.
So people are freaking out because the idea that having two very expensive players can handcuff you moving forward. Are you worried at all about roster building with what you know about the CBA?
I just think we have to know all the information. We have to think it through thoroughly. But I'm not worried about it. Obviously we've shown a willingness to spend. This was a huge tax year for us, and I know that certainly when you get to those different levels that will be in the CBA, that then you have some restrictions in using tools to build your team. Those will be things that every team has to think about and really sort through. But I also know that our ownership and our group is willing to spend to put our best foot forward.
How do you get better at TD Garden?
It's a great question. I sit up here just like you, and I don't know the answer.
Can you put your finger? Like, you're up there watching.
I love being in games in TD Garden. I love coaching in TD Garden. Our players love playing in TD Garden. And, I think the biggest thing, Chris, is I look a lot of those games. Take Game 7 out of the equation. Atlanta, Game 5. Philly, Game 1. I guess Game 5 and Philly you could take out of the equation too. But Game 1 and 2 against Miami, those are all games that we had leads in the third quarter where, when you talk about urgency, it's not how you came out. It's not that you weren't ready to go. It's that we didn't just continue to play all the way through those 48 minutes. And we just have to get better at that, whether at home or on the road. But, we're going to play all year for home court advantage. We have to be better at home.
When you were down 0-3, everyone was trying to grasp it, like why things had gone awry, and there were some reports like, oh, the players are just they don't like each other. Did you ever get any sense of that?
No. Man, I would give anything to have won that Game 7 and be playing today, because some of the conversations that I had individually with players, including like on the bus ride home from that game, were so vulnerable and like willing to do anything to play better. It was not anything like, well, our backs are against the wall, man, we're in trouble. It was all, we can be better. That was an embarrassing game, and we need to play better. Games 1 and 2, we didn't play well in those spurts, and it killed us. Game 3, we just got our doors blown off, and then then you have a decision to make. And credit our guys. The one thing that's inarguable is when their backs are against the wall, their grit shows.
Will you watch the NBA Finals?
I'm not all that excited to watch tonight's game, to be candid, but I do have a job to do and know who everybody is in the league and what everybody, and what every team is looking like and how people are playing. So I'll get to it. I'll probably watch some of it in the mornings on film. I don't think I'm going to, be all that committed to watching the next couple live. I'm still hurting like everybody else from the loss on whatever day that was.
Yeah. What do you do to clear your mind?
I have a tough time clearing my mind. It's one of my biggest challenges. If you got any suggestions, let me know.
I don't know, walk, golf, but it's all about.
I'll do both of those.
Yeah,
those
just get out to nature.
And sometimes you can do both of those at once. That's helpful.
Do you take cards?
I do not.
Me neither. So I actually judge people that take cards. Although down in South Carolina they make me, and that makes me mad.
I've never gotten a chance to golf in South Carolina. Not all of us
now
are
here we go.
That fortunate.
They are roasting me about my tan. I haven't been outside that much. I've been watching a lot of basketball. All right. Thank you for not being overreactionary.
Yep.
Look no further than the award-winning 24 Auto Group. With over 2,600 vehicles in stock, the brands you love, backed by the savings and service you can count on. Visit today or shop online at 24autogroup.com.
All right, so just kind of recap the biggest bullet points of the day. Brad, admitting he can't talk much about Jaylen Brown's Supermax, but it's just going out of his way to say they've had great conversations with Jaylen in the aftermath of Boston's Eastern Conference Finals loss, and that he wants him here, and really just kind of showering him with praise. Does that mean for sure that they get to the finish line of a deal? Of course not. And yet I think that's Brad signaling like, okay, as much as everybody else out there might be trying to break up this core again, Brad is willing to be patient and put this thing and try to find the right pieces to put around this core, because finding those two might be the hardest part. Joe Mazzulla is back this year. I do think it was interesting to hear Brad talk about how exactly you finish out his staff. I brought up the Celtics when Brad first signed here, getting Ron Adams. So just like this grizzled, very knowledgeable top assistant to be there in his first year, to be a sounding board. And Brad joked, of course, all Ron did was say no. But I do think the Celtics will have someone that has just, again, been through the grind, knows what it's like to be in that locker room, knows what the players are thinking, has a lot of NBA experience, whether that's Frank Vogel, whether that's Steven Silas. We'll see exactly which way they lean. But I do think you'll have someone that can just offer Joe little bits of advice, and he might not take it, but at least he's someone there who's been someone that's been through the NBA grind. There are reports out there that the Celtics could lose more coaches. And I think, you heard Brad saying we'll have at least one spot to fill. I think the likelihood is that a lot of those assistants are going to end up going with Ime Udoka in Houston, showing the loyalty to their coach. And, they were good enough to hang around this season, but a chance to rejoin Ime down there with the Rockets. I wonder if that will open even more room to add. So now you can mix and match what you need. Maybe you promote from within somewhat and put guys in even higher spots that you trust in your organization. But also, can you go get that former player voice that you were missing? We heard so much about what the team lost when Damon Stoudemire departed in March to take the Georgia Tech job. Can the Celtics find another voice that knows what the players are talking and speaks that NBA language and knows, like, okay, hey, can go to Joe and say, look, the guys are feeling this way. Like, here's what they need. They want this rotation, or they want this at practice. Just a someone that can really relate to them, but also someone that can hopefully, put some pressure on those guys, and having been in that moment and isn't afraid to tell Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown when they lose their way about what they need to do better. Brad couldn't talk a whole lot about Grant Williams. But it's, obviously suggests that Grant didn't have a huge role at the end of the season, and some of that was the depth that the Celtics had, but that they do trust Grant. If I'm them, especially with the way he looked in the Miami series, I'm hoping that no team blows you out of the water and you're able to bring him back. I think that could be an important position. And there's not a lot of easy ways to sort of fill the power forward center type role or 3-and-D wing. Grant was really consistent there this year. I'd really like to see him back, especially if you can get him on a reasonable number. And his qualifying offers in that $8 million range, I could see Celtics being willing to go up to that mid-level money. They were probably willing to go even a little bit further when they were talking about an extension before this season, and they didn't get there. Grant probably wanted to bet on himself. I do think guys in that mid-tier are probably going to have to settle for a little bit less money, especially as teams start thinking about where to allocate their resources. So I think Grant, if he likes the familiarity of Boston and this core and the role that could expand if there's not as much talent on this roster, should be interested in potentially being back here in Boston. Peyton Pritchard as well has a tough decision. We all know that Peyton wasn't happy with his role, would have liked to have been traded last season. Celtics held on to him through the deadline. Brad has always kind of hinted that he wants to do well by Peyton, but you can't just trade him for nothing. And if there is an exodus among the guard trio, if Malcolm Brogdon is moved, would it make sense to keep Peyton Pritchard to play those regular season minutes and potentially be more of a contributor than he was this year? But certainly the Celtics need more. I'm eager to see what Brad can do. What do you use the mid-level on? Do you split it up? Who do you go after? Are you able to trade someone like a Brogdon and get a serviceable big man back that can take some of the stress off of Al and Rob in that front court position? Can you find another big wing? The goal is always like the Andrew Wiggins type for the Warriors, a starter level player who can spell Jason and Jaylen and can take on a tough defensive assignment and just ease their load. I think those are the two big sort of areas going into the season. But what's clear to me from today's conferences is the Celtics plan to try to just be a little bit crisper, eliminate some of the variance in their play, hopefully get back to the defensive identity they had a year ago. And if they do that, I think this team feels pretty confident that it can be back on that final stage. And I get it. If you're at home and you're like, you've been this close, this long, and you haven't quite, and the only thing you have to show for it is the 6-game loss to the Warriors last year. I understand your frustration. I understand it's easy to just want to make a bigger change that gives you maybe more hope than just the simple tinkering might offer. But I'll keep saying it. The grass is always greener on the other side. You think Damian Lillard's the guy that can, accentuate Jason Tatum and give you the scoring punch that your offense needs. You just don't know, until he gets here. And the people have been saying, okay, well, Jalen would want to play in Atlanta, trade him for Trae Young, you're talking about a team that wants to have a defensive identity, and I don't think Trae fits that. And DeJounte Murray, look, I'm sure a million rumors are going to pop up. We'll break them all down as we go along. But for me, walking away today, it feels an awful lot like the Celtics are hopeful that core is back. Maybe Tatum goes this offseason, gets some surgery on that wrist, eliminates that little variable. Maybe Rob gets a full summer to just relax that knee, comes back looking more like he did for long stretches of the postseason. And, everybody else has got to get themselves right. Jalen can work on the ball handling this offseason. If everyone makes incremental progress and the Celtics really tap into an identity and Joe's a little bit more comfortable, there is a roadmap to getting back to the championship stage. Nothing is guaranteed in this league, and the Celtics have a lot of work to do, especially if they have to start pulling some of the talent apart in order to satisfy this new CBA. But I am confident, and I do think it's the team's best path forward to lean heavy into this core. And you guys can rewind this episode in a year if Celtics were out early or if I was completely wrong. Very rarely wrong. At least that's what I'll say on this podcast. All right. Everybody go check us out on the YouTube page. Go like, subscribe, check us out on your favorite podcasting app. And like I said, I know the season's over, but hang around. We're going to do this all year, all through the summer. It's the most fun time of the year. There's always crazy rumors and stuff to react to. It's even more fun than the night-to-night game stuff. We'll catch you next time on the Celtics Talk Podcast.